Hi everyone, my name is Elvira Anderson and welcome to second day in Python Sweden 2020. I'm very happy to introduce for you our next speaker today. It's Raza Balbale. Raza Balbale is currently Senior Architect at Cognizant Technology Solutions USA. Welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me, Elvira. Thanks.
Yeah, I give a word to you. You can start.
All right, let's get started. Okay, I'm gonna project my screen and let me know what you can see. Right. Could you just confirm, Elvira, for a second if you can see my screen?
Yeah, okay.
Okay, great. All right, so let's get started. So the topic for my talk is solution accelerators with Jinja. I'm going to start by introducing myself and then talk a little bit about how this is relevant, how this adds value, and why you need to think of introducing this as part of your tooling and where the true value add is. So we'll walk through some details. I'm going to be focusing not just on what this whole ecosystem looks like, what's the advantage of templating, but how do you actually go about and implement and drive some value out of it. So let's get started. All right. Just to give some context, and here's a little bit about me. So I'm basically a senior architect, like Elvira said, at Cognizant Technology Solutions USA. Uh, I have been in the full stack application development space for a fairly long time. Worked across industries. Off late, I'm a little more engaged on cloud services space and connected products. So that's typically what I do on a day-to-day basis. What's key is the fact that I look for accelerators. I look for things that can help me do my work faster, enhance my speed. So that's basically the mindset that I'm carrying into this, and that's the reason why I want to share some of my tips and things and learnings from my side. All right. Okay. So before we dive deep into some business analogies and in terms of the technical architecture, how do you implement and how do you go about with using Jinja as a templating engine? Let's talk a little bit about how does this make sense in the general context of things, right? And let's start by taking a business analogy. Say, for instance, you're trying to do an e-commerce solution, right? And there are different components to it. So typically, there could be, the user experience component. There are a ton of backend services. There could be infrastructure components that are at play. So given that, what you try to look for as a business is the fact that how can you scale this faster, how can you achieve some sort of velocity in delivering these solutions, right? So you want to create some value to the business, but how do you create that value faster? How do you make it iterative, right? And typically what happens is along the way when you are delivering some value, you start developing some underlying framework. And when I say framework, it's not typically speaking in a very web framework sort of mindset. It's more about what's my general pattern, and there are things that I'm repeating, there are things that I'm iterating. So you could be working on, say, web APIs, and you're doing it on a rather frequent basis, and there are different services that you need to spin up, and they could have individually web APIs. So you start to think, hey, how do I repeat this? How do I recreate this value? And that's the mindset that you need to bring into the dev and DevOps space as well, right? That's what accelerates, that's what gives you the velocity, and that's exactly the sort of mindset that we want to take and we want to take into our dev space. All right. So let's try to address the problem, right? So unless and until you see a problem, you don't try to solve it, right? So here's the issue at hand. So typically, what happens is when you're trying to recreate value or when you're trying to achieve some sort of velocity, typical engagements. This is just speaking from a purely dev and DevOps perspective. We've seen that a lot of folks try to build up boilerplate code, try to get things up and running, and in the process, what happens is that you try to re-engineer a lot of things. So this has impacts, right? you're investing time. And typically what happens is, so if you have an existing ecosystem, you're trying to reach out to people. So you're consuming their time as well, trying to understand how do certain services work, how do they interplay with each other, what is that typical flow like, and more importantly, say for instance, somebody has introduced you to a GitHub repository on your corporate network, right? And then you start to think, I need to replicate this existing solution and try to build off of that. So you start to think, what are the key customizable pieces, right? So you're starting to think in that direction, but you do not have a clear idea, because yes, it's code, it's operational code, but you do not know what are the key parameters that you need to change and switch in that whole ecosystem to deliver the value that you're trying to deliver. So here's the problem with it, right? Like I said, there's a lot of re-engineering effort. Also, with the fact that you're trying to build things from scratch again, you're losing the value of consistency. So there's a lack of consistency over there. The other big factor is, slowly as you are trying to be a little more experimental, just from a very corporate wide perspective, you start to lose some control, right? Because it's not just about the solutions you're delivering, it's also about how you deliver those solutions. So that's a very critical part of trying to deliver value, and that's where I think the real problem lies. That's exactly what we need to look into and clamp down on. So the solution that I'm talking about today is going to be focused around trying to speed you up, trying to get you up to speed and give you that velocity to move faster and deliver consistent solutions, have a little more control, and just in general increase developer productivity. All right. So just to get a little more tactical, right? Now we spoke about how it kind of strategically it's adding value and helping you move faster, right? But here's how I think of it, right? Typically, you have most of the decisions are kind of trickling down from strategic to tactical, right? I think this is one area where we need to really see the value of what we're trying to build here. So we're doing all this work, templating things, making it configurable, but we're doing it at a very tactical level. But in turn, whether we know it or whether we acknowledge it or not, you're actually enabling your strategic goals to be fulfilled by doing these tactical changes, right? And typically, your strategic goals could be like, hey, we want to deliver these X, Y, and Z solutions over the course of the next 6 months, right? Those are kind of short-term strategic goals. You may have something like you want to deliver in a year and a half, but how do you enable that? And this is where again it all comes back to how are you driving it tactically, and that's where I feel solution accelerators play a critical role. Now we are taking just one aspect of solution accelerators, right? And we're looking at templating today. But solution accelerators could typically be anything that helps you move from 0 to 60 in a space of whatever time that you have assigned, or you have dedicated to reaching this objective of whatever 0 to 60 or whatever your business relevant objective is. So you need to lay this out clearly and try to understand how you're actually driving it tactically. The reason why I'm sharing this is also the fact that it helps you onboard key leadership onto this, right? So whenever you introduce new tooling, you always get the question like, okay, why do we really need this, right? Where's the true value add? Does it make us more flexible? Does it make us more easy to adapt to change? So what's that true value add? And these are sort of conversations you probably want to take back to leadership, and try to engage as many people and try to onboard them. So this is how I would try to look at it, right? And just coming back to the templating solution accelerators that we're looking at, so there's a lot of value in terms of reusability, configurability, and just giving more control. So those are factors that help you drive change and move faster. Okay, so here's the thing. Now I was trying to think of what kind of parallels do we have, right? What kind of existing solutions talk to this narrative? And I was trying to see what's like a one-to-one match, and I haven't seen exactly one-to-one matches, but what I'm seeing is an interesting trend, right? So you see a lot of cloud platforms are doing these low-code, no-code solutions, right? And one such, implementation is like, if you see, look at, what Azure Logic Apps is doing, or, there are a few other implementations as a UiPath and all those. So what is it that's happening over here? So typically, what you do in a low code, no code solution, you identify what are your key components, right? When you're delivering a solution, or when you're building a solution, you try to identify which are your key components. For instance, you could have a REST API or calls to a REST API. You're initializing a few variables, you're setting loops, you are putting some sort of control structures into the flow of your code, right? So, what are they doing basically? They're giving you these components out of the box, but what they're doing is they're making it configurable. So this is one thing which I felt was kind of closest to that, templating mindset, right? And it's there is a great deal of value, because definitely with low code, no code solutions, you can move faster. Also, it's intended to have more people contribute, to have more people build things out, to just enable that ease of use. But in a typical developer setup, I think the real value add comes from the fact that you have more flexibility when you have actual code to interact with. A lot of these low code, no code solutions abstract away that, access to code, take that away from you. But it's a trade off depending on where you stand, what your business objectives are. You can decide whether to go with that, or you start looking at, templating. But in typical developer heavy teams, it's encouraged that, you have more of code driven solutions where you can, configure. The other pattern that I'm seeing, or parallel I'm seeing, is the infrastructure as code. And as we are moving towards cloud based solutions and cloud based services, most of the clients that I'm working with either are already in the cloud, or, are making some sort of transition. So you see that again, it's more or less like you are building these parameters, and, you could do like a YAML file, and it takes that YAML file and builds up infrastructure for you. So there is some parallel. There is some sort of templating under the hood that is happening. There is some sort of services that are being invoked based on these configurations. So that's I think one good segue and things to look at, and just to put some more thought around, how this is all structured and how we could think of it from a broader context. Okay, so let's get to the meat of this, right? We want to have templating engines. Now, why I recommend Jinja, right? One thing is, just in terms of broader adoption for this, and the fact that it's been around, right? You see web frameworks like Flask are using that. You see Ansible, a key component of Ansible is also, the Jinja templating engine. I think that's what you need to take on board, right? So when you are trying to build templates, you want to use an engine which is out there existing. Now, the advantage with Jinja is the fact is there is a great deal of ease of use, right? So I myself, the first time when I started using Jinja, I was like, I think it just took a couple of days to get started and start building some real solutions. So there are some really friendly APIs. The documentation on this framework, on this package, is also really good. So it just makes that much more easier to adapt in your corporate setups, to help your teams engage and try to make them understand, how to operate with this. The other good part that I really like is the fact that it's end product agnostic, right? So it does not necessarily mean that, and this could be applicable to other templating engines also, right? Where whether you have to write code or whether you have to generate code for C sharp, it really does not matter, right? You use the templating engine, you set in your parameters, and, you start get going with that. So it can really help you, get people onboarded. It's relatively easier, and that's the reason why I recommend, going with an existing template engine, an established one at that, like Jinja. So let's stare at some code, right? So what you're seeing here is basically a template for basically generating a Pydantic model, right? And just to give some context for the audience, this is when you're doing web APIs, and most people do use this in the web API ecosystem. You define the structure of what you need to send into the API and what kind of structure you expect to be returned out of the API or out of a web API, right? So it could be any typical REST API implementation would typically look like this. For anyone who's coming from the C# world or maybe Java world, your DTOs basically are a good terminology, the data transfer objects that you typically use to define the structure of what goes in and what comes out. So if you look at this template, it's got certain loops. It's just like your typical Python code. And if you see, you have those curly braces, and then you have those, percentage signs, and then you have the code sitting into it. So what you're doing here is it's very easy, it's very readable. That's the value add, right? Now, when it comes to implementing this and using this for bigger file structures, I do have certain recommendations, and I'll talk about it towards the latter end of my talk in terms of best practices. But this is a good example of what you can use to generate code and get you up and running. So again, this is very readable. It's very easily consumable. If you have any level of knowledge with Python, this will be fairly easy for you to onboard. Okay, now, yeah, I know we want to get into the code and we want to do the demos and we want to get to that. We'll get to that real quick. But let's just talk for a second of how do we implement, right? So when I'm talking about templating solutions and solution accelerators with templating engines, you have to think of it this way. There has to be a set process. This cannot be ad hoc. This cannot be a one-time engagement. And if you do it as individual one-time engagements in your corporate, especially if you're doing it at the enterprise level, you will put yourself into situations where all of this will take away the value, right? You will have a lot of technical debt being accumulated. So let's be a little more organized. Let's be a little more systematic, and let's think about what's the process behind it, right? First and foremost, I would start by identifying what solutions are critical to me, right? What are the ones that I expect to reiterate? What are the ones that I expect to repeat, right? Whether you're in the data science world, whether you're just building web APIs, or what is it that that is relevant and critical to your business, you identify that. You do not have to take each and every piece of code that you're doing in your organization and try to templatize that. That I strongly recommend and suggest that that is not a good practice, because all you're doing is you're accumulating technical debt. So what you need to do is go after the ones which you feel will be repeated most often. Uh, Identify, and there has to be some metric around it. So I typically think wherever you have consumers or people developing that code, whether it's three or more users, that's when I start to think that, hey, this is probably a time where I have to think about templating. The other thing is you have to think about the consumers of that code, right? What is the consensus behind it? There has to be some structure. How do we name our parameters? How do we format our parameters? What is the naming convention that we're going to use in these templates? So those are very important questions to ask yourself and to answer. The other thing is, where do we store this, right? So you would typically have like a GitHub enterprise or something in your enterprise ecosystem, and you'd start thinking about, where do I store this? So that's a question that you also need to ask, and you need to address. Preferably, you need to document that. So those are things that you really need to go after and think about. Come to some conclusion within your team that, hey, this is how we're going to operate. The next is, once you have that, you start using it, you start pushing solutions, and you try to frequent using those templates. But like I said, only for those specific solutions that you feel are valuable enough to go after and template. The next thing you need to think of is, how do we improve this over time, right? So you need to find that fine balance, right? You don't need to go like a million parameters of into the templating engine, and then you start to build things. So you have to, over time, you'll make some fine tunings, you'll make some changes, and you'll try to find the balance that, hey, these are the 5 parameters that I need to send into my templating engine to deliver something. So those are that you need to have like a feedback loop within your developers. Whenever you're doing, you could do like a quarterly review or something, and try to see whether it's still adding a lot of value or not. The ground reality of a lot of this is the fact that at some phase, whatever templates you're developing will phase out. And I say this with some confidence, given the fact that solutions by themselves, over a period of time, they have a lifetime, right? So after some time, they are either depreciating in their value, or they're not having as much engagement, as many end users for that matter. So you have to start thinking about, how do I phase these out as well? So you have to have some process, some plan around, hey, we have used this for 3 years, but we do not see the need to maintain this, so we need to phase this out. So there has to be this complete life cycle, a complete process in terms of how do you manage this end to end, and how do you manage your templating ecosystem. All right. So now we're getting close to the demo. Uh, just to put things into perspective, and before we dive a little deeper, so what you're seeing on the left-hand side of the screen, I'm just going to ask you to ignore it for a second, because that is something which is just invoking this whole process of going and building out templates. So the way I've kind of structured my application for the demo works like this, right? So you have the templates, which is on the right hand side, the one that you see on your screen. Then you have something called injectors, right? So injectors is basically the data structures or the YAML files which I'm using to push data into these templates. Now, typically, in an ideal scenario, you could just be like, "Hey, I'll just pick these, parameters and throw it into the template." But that's not the case all the time, right? So you have to have something that enables that injection of these parameters into the templates. Besides, just as a good practice, it is not a good practice to throw a lot of logic inside these templates, right? So you have to isolate that. And that's what I do with the logical layer, right? So I'm keeping certain logic parameters, which are, logic functions and certain aspects of the logic defined in a separate structure within my code base. So that's a good way to do that isolation. Now, more often than not, since and the parameters that you see, or the params that you're seeing at the bottom, that's not necessary. You don't have to do that in your solution. Since I'm using a command line utility, there are times where I want to, pass parameters into the jobs that I'm invoking for the templates. So just to give a little more context, and I'll speak about what's on the left of the screen, like real quick, just to give context. It's basically nothing but a console application that I have. So I have predefined certain, commands, and these commands invoke actions. And one of these actions is actually going and injecting data into these templates. And based off of that, then you start to see some output, and you start to have some form of usable application. Now, typically, it depends on your business use case, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a solution which is built out, and then I can invoke it, and we can walk through it. All right. Elvira, could you do a quick time check for me?
Yes, of course.
All right. Okay. So let me know if you can see my screen. And hold on a second. Okay. So let's look at this, right? This is basically the structure of the project. So like I said, there are some command definitions I have, and then I'm invoking certain actions around it. So this is not necessary for you. You can build out your project and think about what's the best way for you to inject parameters into the Jinja templates. So this is what is key, right? This is what drives these templates. And let's look at the templates first, and then we look at what kind of data is being pushed into it. So I've got three templates here. So you see Fast API, I have Fast, which is a stream processor, and then you have the IoT client, which I typically use to, if I have to just test connectivity to certain cloud IoT cloud services, I use that to invoke the messages. So let's look at Fast API. All right, this is an upcoming tool. I think there is a good bit of adoption already for Fast API. I think there's an incredible job done with this, framework just to get us those web APIs up and running real quick. So what I've done is I've gone ahead and defined, what my API is going to look like, right? How do I define my API endpoint? So you see these gets and the posts in the template. Then there is, from a data management perspective, how do I want to, pull data from the database? So there's a layer that interacts with that. I have my models defined over here. And these are just templates for the models. These are not the actual models themselves. I will show the data which kind of helps build these models. If you look at the main file, well, this is what orchestrates the application and brings things together. This is again, one critical piece, or the central part where you can build all these orchestrations. But all of these, injections that you see over here are data driven, and they come from a source. So what is that source? And let's talk about the injectors now. If we look at these injectors, let's look at Fast API. All right. So there are two aspects to this. One is just from an API perspective. What is it that I want to build out over, right? So what are the classes that I want to define? What are the properties associated with it? From a database perspective, there are a few other fine tuning aspects that come into play, like whether you have those fields as required fields or not. So you can make this as flexible as possible. But like I said, you have to have some consensus within your team that, hey, this is our accepted YAML file structure. And like I've said, I don't know if I've mentioned this actually. So what you need to keep in mind is, do not let your files go overboard in terms of the size, because here's what it is. The reality is, having staring at a 2,000 line YAML file is not an easy job. Tweaking it is not an easy job. So you have to think of it: how do I keep this concise? How do I keep this consumable? One suggestion I can give is the fact that break it apart into smaller pieces. It keeps things easier. And the metric that you can use over there is, you can have some sort of logical grouping to have these parameters built out, or have these different injectors built out. So have some sort of logical grouping. If it is a specific type of web API components, try to inject data from your YAML file for that. And then break apart, something which more say in terms of data transformation on another YAML file. So try to break it apart logically. It just keeps things simple and keeps things a lot more consumable. All right. So now that we have seen that, let's try to put it into action. All right. And I'm going to, okay. So just to start up my console app, I'm going to do that. And I have just predefined these commands, and like I spoke earlier, it's just an easier way for me to start invoking certain actions. And there is nothing more to that. This command line or the prompt that I'm using is not necessarily having like abstract syntax trees or anything of that sort running in the background. So it's very simple. So in that split second that you were looking at it, so what happened there, right? And let's take a quick look in terms of uh, how that application go. All right. So what I'm going to do is, it's already generated the code for me. I'm just going to invoke the application here, right? Okay. So my web API is up and running, and okay. Let me know if you can see my Chrome tab. So there it is. All right. Now, just by using those injectors that we had set up for our web API, we have built out all the code for generating this API, right? So all of this, if you look at this, right? So you're looking at players, interact with players from here. Where did that come from? And I'll just go back to, um, I will just go back to my YAML file over here real quick, right? Let's look at injectors, and let's look at the API. So you see, this was defined here, the app name, the app description. I've capitalized the app name so it appears with the S capital over there on your Fast API. You see the description comes from there. The description for the individual classes is also coming from there. So you look at it, this entire piece is actually generated from there. Let's go ahead and test one of these. This is actually connected to a database, so I am going to just let it rip real quick. All right. So you see this PyCon player appearing here, and this is basically being pulled up from the database, and we can check that real quick. I think I have my Postgres open somewhere here. So let's look at. All right. You see that? That's coming up and showing up in the database. So you can do and you can pick what kind of battles you want to fight with templating, right? For me, these are certain utilities which add a great deal of value because getting an API up and running real quick is kind of important to me. You can do things like I have other pieces of code which, for instance, I'll just fire up an IoT client, send messages to the cloud. So let me do that real quick. I hope this is not going to break. Let's do Azure. It did. No worries. Let's do. Okay, I think I moved the wrong command over there. Let's app sample and let's do provider is Azure. Okay. Now what you'll see happening in the background. So in the background, I've set up the templates to generate messages and send to the cloud, right? And just to check that real quick, you could go up to our portal. So what's happening in the background, right? It's basically looking at or basically simulating an IoT device and sending messages back up. So it's something that is you do it on a frequent basis and you start thinking, how do I templatize this, right? So the next time somebody has to come on board, they do not have to reinvent the wheel of writing up this client and trying to read messages or send messages off of that. So all that is set up in a very configurable manner, and I'll show again the injector for it. Let's look at my IoT client, right? And we're doing this hello Sweden message. So if you look here, quick. So in the meanwhile, while that gets downloaded, what we can think about is how do we bring this into your ecosystem and start to deliver value. So you have to identify, like I said, what kind of battles do you want to fight, what kind of services make sense to you, what kind of connections do you want to see, right? So if you see, this is basically a message packet that has just been delivered to the cloud, right? So you look at that, and that's the hello Sweden message, right? So there can be multiple use cases for this. You can think about what's the battle that you want to pick and what's the one that you want to fight. All right, Elvira, where are we on the time with that?
Yeah, we have 10 minutes.
Okay. I think I'm good to take questions at this point. I think the demo was again to get you acquainted with how do you set things up and how do you drive things forward. So I'll take a few questions and then I'll have a quick closing note and then we can take it from there.
Yeah, also, if people will want ask, you can ask Raza in Slack. Yeah, yes, it's still options.
Yeah, you can also reach out to me on Slack. Do we have questions at this point? I'm going to open up my stream.
Not now. Not now.
Okay. All right. So there's one other important thing. So if we don't have questions, I could probably wrap up real quick, and we can move ahead with that.
Okay.
Let's
Yes.
give a couple of minutes. So one big other, and this is more from a best practices perspective. I think these are certain caveats and things that you need to keep in mind. Like I said, have some sort of a version control system to get this all together. Have something to regulate and manage and improve your templates over time. Again, find the right balance. Don't try to over configure. That's critical. Don't try to over engineer. Don't try to make your configurations by themselves so big that every time you try to template solutions, it just becomes a really big amount of technical debt to maintain. One big critical piece is do not push credentials into templates. That's going to put you in a bit of a spot. So please be mindful of that. Also, perform peer-to-peer reviews. I think that is really important, and that's critical to the success of this approach. So I think that's all I have. There is one bit of closing note, and if we don't have any questions again, I would like to do that right now.
Okay. Okay, Raza, thank you very much for today. It was very interesting.
Yep. Just one thing before I step off, I'm just going to take a minute or two. And this is something that I wanted to really speak about towards the end, just a minute for it. Those are not methods. Those are actually words. And I think these are potentially biggest solution accelerators that any team or company should really start to think about. And it's again, diversity and inclusiveness. I think it's important to drive conversations around it. I think our keynote speaker, Samira, did a phenomenal job in trying to put that into perspective. Think about it. Think about it from a tactical perspective. Think about, look at your teams and look at if you have enough representation, if you have people from different backgrounds. That for me is the biggest solution accelerator. And Samira spoke about how this is actually even statistically relevant and how it can help you drive change and move things forward. So whenever you're looking for solution accelerators, don't just think about technical aspects. There are things beyond it which can help you drive change and move faster, move better, I think, and it's something really to think about. So with that message, I'm going to sign off, and that's it from me. Thank you, PyCon. Thank you for the volunteer. Thank you to the volunteers, and thank you for everyone to support this event. Thank you, Elvira.
Thank you for today. Have a good day. Bye bye.
You too. Thanks.